but we'll give you some good insights to help you with that, during this webinar. Okay. Now, very importantly, we all come from different faculties, and I think it is important to recognize that, in the different faculties, there are different conventions for how we write. There are different ways of doing referencing. There's different styles, if you like. A medical journal article is going to look very different and feel very different and have very different topics and subjects and issues to deal with than an engineering or a commerce, law, and management journal article, for example. So just recognize that within your own faculties, you are going to be, influenced and expected to, stick with those conventions and be aware of how people in those faculties and in those areas are already writing. But having said that, what we'll teach you in the webinar today and what I teach in all my courses is independent of faculties. Other than the referencing, where I teach about specific referencing styles that might be used for specific faculties, the writing practices and techniques that I give you and teach you and that you can use to improve your writing are independent of faculties. Okay, I think there was one or two questions here. The first one was, Lorato, I struggle with wrapping up my ideas, tips on writing a good conclusion. So you've got I think, every paragraph almost needs to have a little ending as well. And, this is just related to the previous topic. We often don't conclude each paragraph. So what happens is your reader never really gets to the end or sees a logical stepping stone from one paragraph to the next. And if you don't have mini conclusions all the way through your writing, then there's going to be this massive conclusion at the end of either a section or the end of the whole final report, where you haven't given your reader a chance to just take a break and conclude on thoughts and topics as you go. So, Lorato, the fact that you struggle with wrapping up ideas is something that I think you should apply in paragraphs, in sections, and then at the end of your final report. And what that'll do is, as a tip, it'll help you then go back to each of those little conclusions and then use those to bring your large conclusion together. And, if I think about the conclusion of a literature review section of your final report, for example, that's really going to summarize, your approach to the literature. It's going to summarize the different questions that you asked, the gap in the literature. The conclusion of a methodology section might be a little bit more of a summary. The conclusion of a results section, might start talking about the interpretation of those results, because a conclusion of a section is also going to lead into the next section. So you've got to look at the conclusion in the context of where it is that you're writing that conclusion. Okay, Salam Mawet, I absolutely, and this is why I'm so passionate about this, English is not my first language. When my mind is busy looking for proper words, I get lost on the topic. Right, so you have teed up the next slide, because the problem is that we write about complex ideas. So we use complex writing. And we think that a complex style implies some sort of academic excellence. And we often try to copy the style of writing that we see in journals by very experienced and senior professors, for example. And that compounds this problem of, language being your second language. And it really affects, and I've seen it so many times with so many students, it affects their motivation, it affects their confidence with their writing. And what I want to enforce with you guys today is that you have to write in plain English. And I'll give you some practical tips and ways of doing that just now. Don't think that you have to write in complex academic prose and therefore are looking for difficult English words. Start by putting down the simplest version of the English words that is going to convey the meaning across to the reader. And Salima, we're again going to come back to that and give you a sense of how you can improve your writing from that perspective. Okay, so let's get into then some of the actual teaching, and I think this will start to help you if you've had some specific questions. And really, there's 4 specific practices that I'm going to help you with in this webinar. And the first one is to make sure that your subject is a clear doer or actor in the story, and we learned this in school, or it's basic sort of English grammar sentence structure, that a subject of a sentence must be a person, a place, or an object. And what we see in those two sentences is two different examples of that. The first one was it puts the subject of the sentence as a person. So they're writing about Locke, who was obviously an English literature expert, and they say that Locke frequently repeated himself because he did not trust the power of words, etc. So Locke is the subject, and you can see that in the first sentence, it's a clear doer or actor in the story. And as I said, you are always telling a story in what you're doing and in what you're writing. And once again, just make sure that the subjects, and remember, the subject does the action in the sentence. So when you are writing, and as I said earlier, you need to be your own editor, have a look at what is the subject of my sentence and how am I making this as clear as possible. Because if you use an abstract subject, like in that second sentence there, which the second sentence says exactly the same thing as the first sentence, but it's a lot more convoluted and it's a lot more complex. And if you try and write like that, as to the comment that was just made from one of the people in the webinar, you're going to be looking for more words than you need to. So why make your life hard? Keep your subjects as simple and as practical as possible. You will convey the same meaning, but you'll use less words, and your writing will be clearer, and it'll have a greater degree of clarity in it. So that's the first tip there. And I just want to see here, Kobedi says, I struggle with putting my points concisely without drifting away from the main issue and still coherent and logical flow of thought. So Kobedi, tip number one, make sure your subject is a clear doer of the action. We're going to talk about verbs and actions just now, and it's very easy to make this mistake. When you talk about something that is abstract, you bring in extra words, you bring in pronouns, you bring in prepositions, and you can see there in that second sentence, the subject of that sentence is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words. So that sentence there is difficult to understand. And if you're reading a lot of sentences over a final report, of 30, 40,000 words, the ability for you to stay coherent and have a logical flow of thoughts, you're really going to struggle. So Kobedi, first learning that you hopefully have from today's webinar is this point around the subjects there. Okay. Lesejo says, I'm struggling with writing the background of my study, but I somehow have put a literature review together. Okay, so Lesejo, there is a video on the YouTube channel about writing literature reviews and how you can approach the different elements that go into a literature review, and that includes the background of the study. And I'll pop a link to that video in the chat a little bit later. But if you subscribe into the YouTube channel, you'll be able to pick that up quite easily. And I'll just make sure that everybody's got the access to that, the link that you need to go and click on to be able to subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can get that video. And obviously this one and all the other content that I created make available for you. And included in there, Lesejo, is proposals and literature reviews, both in your final report and at the beginning of your study when you need to do an initial literature review. And even in the Student Success Masterclass course, which I will provide you today for free, there is a section in that course that helps you to write a proposal and to get the background right. So Lesejo, hopefully you'll be able to hop in there and get some value from that. Okay, then another example when we look at subjects and characters is as follows over here. And you can see there that the subject in the second sentence is actually an obscure action, but the subjects in sentence number one are clear and concise. So you absolutely need to be your own editor. You need to be looking at your subjects and saying, is my subject clear, or have I turned my subject around and made it more abstract such that it adds words into my sentence? And one of the most important things that people struggle with in writing is too many words in a sentence. Sentences are too long, too convoluted, and you struggle to maintain the logical flow and the coherency and the clarity of your writing. So keep your subjects absolutely clear, and if you cannot, put the subject down in 2 or 3 words, then most probably you've fallen into the same trap here, where your subjects are obscure and abstract, and you need to make them much more clear and concise. So when it's a tangible, person, thing, place, a rainforest, the Earth's biosphere, Locke as a person on the previous slide, those are clear subjects, and we're able to convey meaning with clear subjects a lot easier.